I hope you're having a great week as you're gathering for your small group. And, I'm really enjoying the sermon series that we're doing from Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, specifically his second letter to the Corinthians. And one of the things that Paul dealt with the Corinthian church was just people that were just out of control. I don't even know way to put it. They looked for every way and excuse and thing that they could say against Paul. They really blamed him at one point for not coming to see them when he said he was going to. Circumstances in Paul's life changed, and they really almost took that personally. And in a lot of ways, they were honestly looking for a reason to be upset with Paul. They wanted to challenge some of the things he was teaching, some of the things he was saying, some of the things that he had written to them. And so any way that they could kind of discredit him, they wanted to be able to do that. So as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, he's kind of trying to deal with this with them. And he specifically says to them in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, he says, "We can say with confidence and a clear conscience that we have lived with a God-given holiness and sincerity in all our dealings. We have depended on God's grace, not on our human wisdom. That is how we have conducted ourselves before the world, and especially toward you. Our letters have been straightforward, and there's nothing written between the lines and nothing you can't understand. I hope someday you will fully understand us." So Paul just basically comes to them and says, I understand you're upset, I understand you're hurt, but I've been trying to do nothing but deal with you in a straightforward and a clear manner. I have a clear conscience in this. I'm trying to rely on God. I'm trying to rely on what He's doing and what He's saying, and I'm trying to be guided by Him. So He's telling them that they don't have anything to be offended about here. He's trying to explain himself. And look, here's how the world works. We are going to come into conflict with those around us. Paul dealt with it on multiple occasions with multiple people. He wrote about it. You see it a lot in the book of Acts. He came into conflict with people. And when Paul came into conflict with people, he has some certain ways that he dealt with these things. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to come into conflict with people that you work with, that you go to school with. You're going to come into conflict with family members. You're going to come into conflict, unfortunately, with church members. I mean, we would like to think that the church is a place where you're simply not going to have these kind of disagreements, these kind of petty things, because at its heart, this was a petty thing that they were trying to push against Paul and trying to discredit him. But you're going to. We're going to have these things happen. And so as we think about this, there's some things for you to remember and kind of lock away when you come across this. And one of them is that sometimes you're going to be misunderstood. Sometimes you're going to be misunderstood by people that are even close to you. Folks that you love, that you care about deeply, are going to misunderstand what you said, or they're going to misunderstand your intentions. Get ready for it. It's just going to happen. That's a little bit of what I think happened here with Paul. They misunderstood some things. They misinterpreted some things. So one of the things that I like to think about when I'm dealing with people, when I'm dealing with difficult situations, is I want to try as hard as I can to make sure that people don't misunderstand my intentions. I think it invariably happens in some cases anyway, but I try to minimize that. A real practical thing for you, one of the things that I do in trying to make sure people don't misunderstand my intentions and misunderstand what I'm saying is, if it's a really important conversation, I don't have it on the phone, and I don't have it over text messages especially. I think too many of us, we try to handle delicate situations or handle difficult things sometimes over a text message or an email, even a phone call. There's something special about stopping and sitting down in front of people and having that conversation with them. Paul didn't necessarily have the opportunity to always do that because of the distance that he was dealing with as he's traveling from Greece to Asia Minor, what we know as today as Turkey. As he's over in places like Syria, he didn't have the opportunity to do that always, so he had to communicate through the written word. But if we have the opportunity, we need to try to communicate difficult things, and things could be easily misunderstood face to face. That way people can ask questions. They can see our facial expressions. They can see our body language. You know, I watch teenagers sometimes as they text back and forth, and they're trying to read between the lines of what that text really meant. You know, I think us as adults try to do that too. So have those things face to face. Deal with that face to face. And look, don't be defensive. This is another really important thing. When you feel like somebody's misunderstood you, or somebody's coming at you, or somebody believes that you've treated them wrong, don't get defensive. Don't throw up walls. Don't come back at them. Be honest and be clear, and be non-defensive in that explanation. Because if you come back at them, then that's just going to escalate the situation. You can see there from 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13 that I read to you a minute ago. Paul talks about being sincere in his dealings, talking about depending on God's grace. He's talking about how he's conducted himself in the world and towards them, how he's straightforward, he's honest, he's clear, he's not defensive. Because as soon as you get defensive, that other person is going to then throw that same thing up in the air, and they're going to do the exact same thing, and it will simply just kind of escalate up as we go. Now, another thing you have to remember: when people are upset, when people are hurt, when people feel misunderstood, when people feel like you've done them wrong, you can't control how they respond. This is something that I've had to learn over the years. No matter what my intentions are, how somebody takes them, and how they may even respond to an apology that I may give, I can't control that. Here's the one thing you can control. You control your response. You control how you act. Paul couldn't control how the Corinthians were going to act. He couldn't control how they were going to respond, but he could control how he responded, and he kept himself under control and thought through what he was saying and what he was writing and how he talked to people. Other thing that we should be doing is praying. When we're having conflict with somebody, when somebody's misunderstood us, when somebody's taken our intentions wrongly, pray for them. Because what that does, that really disarms you. It's really hard to stay mad at somebody, stay upset at somebody that you are praying for. So stop and pray over the situation, but pray for that person individually, and never return evil for evil. You know, it's not an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth kind of situation. It's not, not get back. So I remember being a kid and reading Mad magazine way back in the day, and reading the old Spy versus Spy. I liked that old comic strip because there were these two spies, and one of them was dressed in black and one in white. That was the only difference. It was exactly the same except for the clothes that they were wearing, and they constantly were trying to one-up each other. If one of them was trying to blow up the other one with a bomb that was fit in the palm of his hand, the other one would try to blow him up with a bomb that was barely fitting through the door. If one had a handgun, the other one had a machine gun. It was a constant one-upsmanship. So when we're dealing with conflict with somebody, that is the last thing we want to do. We don't want to be returning evil for evil. We're not trying to live in an Old Testament eye for an eye kind of situation. It's not what we're doing. We're only going to cause this thing to escalate time after time until there's just absolute just hatred for each other. Paul could have come back at these Corinthian Christians and told them how wrong they were about this and wrong they were about that and how awful they were, and talked about all the things that they had done wrong. And yes, he confronted their sin in his letters. He did. But he always did it with an eye towards restoration. Always with an eye towards getting them back to where they needed to be. It was never personal for him. He loved them and he cared about them. So we can't return evil for evil. Now, here's the honest truth about most things. Both parties are going to have some wrong. And that's something that I've talked to people about that's dealt with conflict and things over the years is, look, nobody in any of these situations, generally, with rare exceptions, is completely innocent. So be self-aware. Paul's situation was a little different, I think, than a lot of our situations. Be self-aware enough to realize where you're at fault, where the way you phrased something wasn't good. Maybe your intentions weren't bad, but you could see how it came across that way. Maybe you did have some bad intentions in the middle of this. I don't know, but be self-aware enough to see where you're at fault. We've got to be able to turn that mirror back on ourselves and look at ourselves and see ourselves for who we really are. We are broken people. We are fallible. We are prone to mistake. We are prone to let our emotions take control of the things that we do and the things that we say. And in the middle of doing that, we can either intentionally or sometimes unintentionally hurt people. And so we have to look back at ourselves and say, where was my wrong in this? What could I have done better? I think about that as a pastor all the time. How can I communicate better? How can I be more clear? How can I make a change or something that needs to happen in the church or in dealing with an individual that may be having an issue? How can I better communicate with them in a way that is more gentle and better and kinder? So look at where you're at fault and be willing to apologize. Own up to your issues. Look, there's times when I've apologized when I honestly, deep down in my heart, didn't necessarily think I did anything wrong. That's the truth. Because I had hurt somebody, whether I thought I had done that intentionally, unintentionally, even if I thought they should not have taken offense to this, I still apologize anyway. Because that relationship and that person and my witness to them is more important. That's the important part. So being willing to apologize and own up to your own issues and own up to where you're at fault is something that will mend a lot of things. It tends to disarm things. It tends to turn things down, tone things down, instead of allowing them to escalate. So be willing to apologize. So Paul was dealing with these Corinthians, and he had love for them. He cared for them, and he was straightforward with them. He had not done wrong to them, but he understood that they took things the wrong way. They misunderstood. He was honest as he dealt with this. He couldn't control how they responded, but he could control how he responded. He was constantly praying for them. He talks about that throughout 1 and 2 Corinthians. He's praying for them. He had no desire to return evil for evil, and he was self-aware enough to understand at times he could be at fault. So folks, we've got to be willing to deal with that ourselves and be willing to apologize, and be willing to let things go, be willing to be the people that Christ is calling us to be. So I hope that you've gotten something out of this video, and I hope your discussion goes well in your small groups this week. But you guys have a blessed week. I look forward to seeing you at church soon.